Welcome to the Writers Center. Thank you so much for coming out on this rainy evening. It's wonderful to see you here. I see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new faces. This is a very special evening for us. I'm Stuart Moss, the Executive Director of the Writers Center. And we are honored to have five fabulous authors here tonight that are reading in tribute to Richard Ford, who is the honoree at the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Festival, which takes place tomorrow in Rockville. Those of you who have purchased a ticket for this event, hang on to your ticket, because if you show the ticket tomorrow up in Rockville, you get a discount on actually attending the festival. Richard will be teaching a master class. He'll be giving a speech when he receives his award. And Robert Owen Butler will be teaching a workshop. Susan Shreve will be teaching a workshop as well. So it's a wonderful event. This is, I think, the 19th year of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Conference. We've been very honored. The Writers Center has to be part of this fantastic event for the metropolitan Washington area. And there are postcards available outside. Please pick up one, and this will give you more detail about the festival. It starts at 9 o'clock in Rockville and goes until 6:30 p.m. And it's all contained in one location at the Best Western Hotel. So please, if you haven't got other plans for tomorrow and you love wonderful literature, I very strongly encourage you. The way this is going to work tonight is we have four authors who have an association with Richard Ford. And Richard very modestly asked if they would read from their own work in tribute to him, in what he called mute tribute to him. The original idea was, as we had with James Salter last year at the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Festival, they would read from Salter's work, some of their favorite passages from Salter's work. But Richard wanted it to be different this year and for people to read from their own work. So that's what you're going to be hearing. I'll be introducing each of them. We have Robert Owen Butler, Susan Shreve, Jeff Eugenides, and Howard Norman. And they'll be coming up, and I'll introduce each of them individually. They'll read for 15 minutes or so, explain what they're reading. And then afterwards, we have a reception and book signing. We have books from all of our four readers that are available for purchase. And we have a lovely spread of refreshments, wine, beer, and other potables that will be made available to you when you after the actual reading. So it's my great pleasure and honor to first introduce Robert Owen Butler, who was actually, I reminded him that he read here at the Writers Center back in the 30th anniversary of the Writers Center 10 years ago. The Writers Center will be celebrating our 40th anniversary starting in January, and this is kind of an informal kickoff event for that 40th anniversary. So we're very honored to have Bob Butler with us tonight. Robert Owen Butler has published 15 novels and 6 volumes of short fiction, one of which, A Good Scent from a Strange Mountain, won the 1993 Pulitzer Prize for fiction. He's published also a volume of his lectures on the creative process entitled From Where You Dream, The Process of Writing Fiction, and he was the 2013 recipient of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Award for Outstanding Achievement in American Literature and was a finalist for the PEN-Faulkner Award in 1993. Among his many other honors are the Richard and Hinda Rosenthal Foundation Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, a Guggenheim Fellowship in Fiction, and 2 National Magazine Awards in Fiction. He teaches currently in the Creative Writing Program at Florida State University. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Robert Owen Butler.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Richard, and in maybe not so mute honor of you. Richard and I have both written more novels than we have books of stories, but I'm going to read a story tonight because I'll explain that a little more tomorrow in my introduction of Richard. The essential things about writing stories I learned from this man. So the tribute is to write a story. About 2 years ago, I wrote in quick succession 3 short stories. as I turned 70 in January. I was coming up to 70 and found myself, as my characters in A Good Scent from Strange Mountain, exiled into a new country, which is the country of incipient old age and intimations of mortality. And as with those characters in that book, having to reinvent who I am in a sense, we all do in a way, on that cusp. And these three stories appeared, one in Granta Online and one in Conjunctions. That's the one I'll read tonight. The third one just confirmed me, although the characters now are transformed. These three stories are absolutely stories, but they opened up a novel which I have just finished called Perfume River, about our generation and how we, like those others, redefined ourselves as exiles in terms of how Vietnam influenced us. And so this is a story called AWOL. The night my mother died, I was sleepless in a hotel room in Miami. From what Stan, Dr. Sparkman, tells me, from what the nurses told him, I figure I was awake at the moment she passed. I wasn't there, but I was awake. Before I left her, Stan assured me she could live on as she was for a long, indefinite period. If it was at all important, I should go ahead to Miami. So I came down to say goodbye to the stockholders, and they stood up and applauded in thanks and regret at my passing, at my retirement. He built all this for us from nothing, they said. What a guy. She was demented. Not at first. She broke her hip in assisted living in a nice place in Buckhead, where my dad had died a few years earlier. She was standing in the center of her living room floor, and she was 92 years old, and she was talking to a nurse, trying to explain Bach to her, which was filling the room at the time, and which the nurse had asked her about. And my mother up and fell, just like that, and her hip was broken. Stan says the breaking of the hip likely preceded the fall. But there it is. When her surgeon the next morning warned me that one person out of two over 80 years old who breaks a hip dies within 6 months, I thought my mother would beat those odds if anyone could. She didn't. She broke her wrist as well. She couldn't rehab the hip. So she spent the rest of her life flat on her back in a nursing home. Another nice place up in Buckhead, with me just 20 minutes away, mostly downtown in the Georgia Pacific Tower, helping the oil fields and construction sites of the world manage their risks. She moved from hospital to nursing home with a clear mind. I went into a swoon over an adagio is what happened, she said. Her very first words when I sat down beside her bed, her never having thought to explain in the hospital. She was buttoned up to the throat in her flannel pajamas, the institutional blanket smoothed over her, and the bed cranked up so she could read. We brought the stand-up wrought iron lamp that had stood by her reading chair for as long as I could remember. From the Brandenburg Concerto No. 1, she said. I said, Dad always thought Johann would do you wrong. She extracted her right hand from beneath the covers to slap me lightly on the wrist. Your father and I had an understanding about me and Herr Bach. I caught her hand before she could take it away, and I held it. She turned her face away from me. Do I smell of piss? She said. A little bit, I said. I'm in diapers, she said, her face coming back to me. But they better not talk to me as if I were a child. I think they realize that, I said. The nurse said they liked your spirit. They ain't seen nothing yet, she said. I squeezed her hand gently. She took it away. The gentleness felt patronizing to her. She didn't say so, but she looked me hard in the eyes for a moment, then she softened. "You got your drive from me, you know," she said. Not from Dad, from her. She was right. "I know," I said, "and I'm grateful." I didn't take up her hand again, though I had the urge. She was fine. She was who she was when she first moved from the hospital to the nursing home. She taught me to drive myself. I learned things elsewhere as well. I just wish I'd been smarter about applying them. The dementia was beginning by the next time I saw her, less than a week later. I didn't recognize it at first. In my first visit, I'd hung a framed print on the wall beyond the foot of her bed. She wanted to see it always. Van Gogh's Starry Night. Bach's Adagio spoke to what she always hoped for in herself, but I doubt ever really found. The painting was what she lived with always. Even a quiet night of church spire and olive tree, of rooftops and mountains, of clouds and moon and stars, even these were roiling, ever roiling, caught up in a ceaseless vortex of anxiety. She nodded to the painting. "Your father went out there last night and he hasn't come back," she said. I laughed softly. "I don't care," she said. "He needs to walk more." I took it all as an imaginative little riff on her disaffection with my father, a common theme ever since he died in hospice care in their assisted living apartment shortly after their 65th anniversary. But in fact, she meant it literally. As this thing in her brain began to spin more rapidly, she would often begin our visit by pointing him out to me. There he was, beside the olive tree, or on the mountain slope, or at the church door. I had to see him wandering out there before she would go on. Then she'd swirl on to me, how I was about to ruin her life and mine by letting myself go off to war. She was convinced. She was unremitting. I could never figure out how simply to stay quiet or deflect her. It would follow much the same script each time. She says, "Please don't go." I say, "It's all over. I'm back." "We should leave the Vietnamese alone," she says. "That all ended decades ago. You can still run away. There's no need anymore," I say. "You can go to Canada. Your father and I can visit you." "Ma," I say, using the softest name for her but the sharpest tone she'll tolerate. "The Vietnam War is over. I'm back and I'm safe. Don't leave me," she says. "I can't bear it. I'm here. A year would feel like a lifetime," she says. "Ma," I say, "you'll die over there," she says. "You'll die alone." And sometimes she got stuck on the part about her being left alone. At least that would shift her sense of time back to the present. But the big problem with her being left alone in the nursing home was that there was so much for her to do in the middle of the night. The nurses needed her help, and she tried and tried, but she didn't know how. I heard this last theme for weeks before it made sense. How stupid I'd become. I was an intelligence lieutenant in Vietnam. For the first few months, I ran a little all-purpose shop out of Plantation, about 30 clicks up Highway 1 from Saigon. When we interrogated suspects, I always had my boys play it by the book. But it was 1971. Units were standing down. 5 months into my tour, our unit went home and I got reassigned upcountry into I Corps. The first cav had just stood down up there and everyone was very nervous, butt to butt, as they were with the North. I ended up working under a captain who had long ago stopped playing it by the book. We were in a field office within smelling distance of the Gulf of Tonkin, And the thing that finally came back to me in the nursing home was a night during that summer of '71. A young Charlie in black PJs was caught with wire cutters and a couple of grenades on our perimeter. They took him to be a sapper. He might have been an unfriendly, but from how easy they grabbed him and from his measly arsenal, he was no proper sapper. It didn't make any difference in those days. He was locked in the back, in our interrogation room, which was bare except for a cot and a piss pot and a chair. And I pulled the midnight to dawn shift, sitting at the captain's desk in the front of the shop, reading cast-off paperbacks and sending in an MI sergeant to wake our Charlie every hour. Just wake him up thoroughly. This went on around the clock. It was as simple as that. The method. Never let him finish a dream. You had to grill him good in those first 24 hours, because by the second day he was utterly disoriented, and by the third day he was hallucinating pretty much all the time. As it was, we never got 3 coherent sentences in a row out of this guy, much less useful intelligence. But the captain sure was one hell of a tough guy interrogator. So one afternoon, near the end of the 3rd month of my mother's failing mind, she was explaining to me how she really needed some help in the middle of the upcoming night, either from me or from my dad. Hadn't she always been there for us when we needed her? Because she was going to have to do the work of 10 nurses, and they didn't even give her a sponge and a bucket. And abruptly, I knew. I went out of the room and down to the nurse's station, and I asked what the procedure was in the night. What did they do to take care of her? She was the peroxided, ready-to-retire head nurse with a serious groove between her eyebrows that instantly furrowed deeper. Is something wrong? She said. I remembered enough about interrogation from 40 years ago to hear that tone of voice and let her tell me what was wrong. What do you think? I said. She was clear last night, she said. Are you sure? Diaper rash can come quick, she said. We love your mother. We're vigilant, I assure you. I nodded. Diaper rash. I could well imagine. For the state inspections of nursing homes, this must be an obvious objective measure. I bet the lawyers of litigious family members love a slideshow of diaper rash for the judge. And what do you do to prevent it? I said. The head nurse straightened in her chair and relaxed her brow and announced, we check her diaper every 2 hours, day and night. Day and night, I said. Yes, sir, she said. You go in every 2 hours through the night and wake her to check her diaper. She goes right back to sleep. Stan, who doesn't do nursing home rounds but took my mother on as a favor to me, was appalled at the procedure and leaned on the home management to put her on a bedtime and rising diaper routine. She lasted another 3 months and not once got the rash. But her mind was so fucked over by then, she never recovered. I awoke, thinking it was something in the room. And it was something outside, some sound. But there was only silence. I knew at once where I was. No confusion, no flashbacks. The hotel sat on Brickell Key, and my balcony looked across a river-sized slice of Biscayne Bay at the south downtown Miami skyline. Nothing out there would make a sound at this hour. I sat up, pulled the covers back, put my feet on the floor. Where was I going? Nowhere. Just to a sitting position with my feet on the floor. back to Atlanta in a few hours. I'd been gone barely 36. The last time I saw my mother alive, she was sleeping hard at noon, even though I was beside her. Not a coma. She'd wake up, but only enough to turn her eyes to me. She'd stop talking. The last time she spoke to me, 2 days before, she lifted her hand for mine as I was about to go back to the office, and she held on tight, and she said, "Kenny." And my name struck me as if it was for the first time, as if she'd only just then named me. She said no more. She let go. I went out. But sitting on the side of the bed in the hotel room in Miami, I knew what she wanted to say. Don't go.
Thank you, Bob, for that wonderful, wonderful reading. By the way, I didn't mention before I introduced Susan Shreve, that we did not build this set especially for this event. Those of you who have brought dirty laundry with you in your cars during the book signing and reception we have afterwards, please feel free to bring them in. Use the Maytag. This is a play that our resident theater company, Quotidian Theater, is doing called Maytag Virgins, and it just opened last weekend, so that's why we have this set up here. Any of you would like to rent these lovely condos, writing, please see me afterwards. It's got you a special deal. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Susan Shreve. Sue is the author of 14 novels, most recently You Are the Love of My Life, it was published in 2012, and a student of living things, and of a memoir, Warm Springs, Traces of a Childhood. Her novel, A Country of Strangers, is under option for film, and Daughters of the New World was an NBC miniseries under the title A Will of Their Own. She has written 30 books for children. Her latest are The Lovely Shoes and The Search for Baby Ruby. She is the co-editor or editor of 5 anthologies, including Bring Me Home Safely, Tales Out of School, How We Learn to Live, and Skin Deep, which she co-edited. She's founder of the Master of Fine Arts degree at George Mason University, where she is professor of English and is chairman of the Penn Faulkner Foundation. She's received a Guggenheim Award for Fiction, National Endowment Grant for Fiction, the Jenny Moore Chair in Creative Writing at George Washington University, and has won both the Grub Street Prize for Nonfiction and the Service Award for Poets and Writers. She has taught at Columbia University School of Arts and at Princeton University. Please join me in welcoming Susan Shreve.
The mic, but Stuart said you might not be able to hear me, so tell me if you can't. I met Richard 1974, maybe 75 at Breadloaf. We were both first novelists, and I remember so clearly going up to my very hard bed at Breadloaf and reading his first novel and thinking, I will never be able to write such beautiful prose, and I have not. The piece that I'm going to read is can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. The piece I'm going to read is from a novel. I'm sorry to say I only write novels. I can't write short stories. They're a higher form. And it's a novel that begins in 1941 on a river with a camp director and his team, his wife, and his 4-year-old child going to the camp he directs in northern Wisconsin. And on this camping adventure, his wife is murdered and he confesses to her murder, leaving a 4-year-old child. In 2008, this 4-year-old child is 70, and she hears from the one living person who was on that trip. She's an anthropologist and archaeologist interested in uncovering what's underneath the earth. And she insists that her family join her because all of her life she has not believed that her father killed her mother. On this trip, thinking in her a little bit crazy way that by being at the exact place where it happened, she will find out the truth. And so all of her family is reluctantly along on this voyage, so the people mentioned here are in her family. And this is written, and this part is what has to do with Richard, from the point of view of a precocious 13-year-old boy whose father has died and who's really very keen to be on this trip because he hopes that actually his great-grandfather did kill his great-grandmother, because it's a pretty cool story to write about. So he's keeping a journal, and this is a bit of his journal. It's interspersed in the novel, which I may sometime finish. From the memoir of Thomas Davis. We are a small family traveling the Bone River in northern Wisconsin on our way to a place we have never been called home, traveling by canoe. I am in the lead canoe paddling stern, and in the bow is Georgie, who planned this trip and gave it to us with the requirement that we come. No one. Not my Uncle Nicholas or my Aunt Venus, her recent choice for a name change, or my dreamy mother, or either of the cousins wanted to come except for me, but they didn't have the heart to tell Georgie. I wanted to come on this trip enough for all of us. On the floor of our canoe in her little red life jacket, spreading banana on my bare leg, is Una, my Uncle Nicholas's daughter, and although she is only 4, she is the person in the world I love completely. And it worries me to think that I love her enough to lose her. If that were to happen, I would die. I think of death, and I think about death all the time, as flat, without any curves or indentations. A long, perfectly straight line, which I imagine when I'm sitting in Mr. Blake's English class and he's telling us about roses blooming in his mouth when he thinks about poetry. And I hope he won't think about poetry until after the bell rings. We are paddling in 3 canoes and arriving exactly now, still daylight, at Missing Lake, Wisconsin, the place where we will spend the night before we reach our destination. Now Georgie is raising her paddle in the air, pointing to a cove shaped like a saucer, with high pines surrounding a crescent of sandless beach. She motions for me to turn us towards shore. Here we are, she calls. Here is where my great-grandfather William killed his wife on the 17th of June, 1941, or confessed to killing her, as Georgie says. She believes that by taking this trip, reenacting, she calls it, we will discover evidence to the contrary, that her father, in spite of his confession, did not kill his wife. Georgie is an anthropologist who spends her life researching in order to discover what has been lost so that it can be found. That is how my mother describes her work, which is why I'm keeping a journal so that thousands of years from now, another anthropologist, someone like Georgie, will uncover the journal from layers and layers of earth where it has been buried, and read it, and know that we, 7 of us, were here on this Bone River in the town of Missing Lake on the planet Earth. Georgie likes what she calls planned coincidence. The stars in alignment, but you can miss them if you don't pay attention, she says. And then taking the stars into account, she makes a plan. What a coincidence that Una should be exactly the same age as I was when my mother was killed, she told us all at Christmas. That Thomas will be 13, which is the same age as Roosevelt McCrary in 1941. And so we will plan to travel on the same day that my parents were traveling 67 years ago up the same Bone River to the same destination. And then what, Uncle Nico asked at Christmas dinner. Then by following these signs, these telling signs, we may have a chance to discover what really happened at Missing Lake, Wisconsin on June 17, 1941. That is how Georgie speaks, not all the time, but with emphasis, as if she holds some kind of key to the unknown. And if we stick with her, we'll discover it too. The unknown, that is. Why now, Georgie, Uncle Nico asks. You've had more than 60 years since your father died to find out what happened. Because now is when I want to know. In the second canoe, my mother Rosie is paddling stern in that sleepy way she has of doing everything. So the canoe keeps heading for the bank on the opposite side of the river because she lets the paddle laze in one direction. I can hear my cousin Jesse over the whistle of wind. Rosie, he shouts, pay fucking attention. Jesse is too old to say fuck in every sentence, but that is what he does, and I want to kill him when he yells at her. Our whole family is on this trip except the cats and our dog Kubla, a retriever who was given to me last Christmas as a substitute for my father who died 2 years ago in September. Kubla Khan, Uncle Nico's choice of a name. When we got Kubla, I begged my mother to name him for my father, and I wish she had been willing. My father loved dogs, and if a dog had his name, which was Richard Davies, he would still be alive. Richard, I would call going to the back door. Come here, Richard Davies. Dinner is ready. And he would come wagging his tail, and I would give him dinner and sit down on the floor of the kitchen with him while he ate. Richard Davies, captured in the brave heart of a dog. But my mother said no, under no circumstances. It's disrespectful, Thomas, and nothing, not even your father's name, shouted from the mountaintops, can make a difference now, and certainly not his name on a dog. I love my mother very much, but it is difficult to get her attention, as if when she looks at me, she sees not me, and I know she loves me, but a painting she is imagining on the inside of her eyelids. So that is what she does. Paint. And she is known for it, and her work is in museums, even though she's only 43, and pretty. She's very pretty, and kind of fairy-like, floating through a room. But there are no people in her artwork, only rooms, bedrooms with the sheets tossed half off the bed as if someone had just left and is brushing his teeth in a bathroom next door. A dining room, food on the table, a wine glass turned over, chairs pulled back, napkins on the floor, a living room with a book face down on the couch, a chair leaning against the wall, a painting, crooked, something disturbing, as if a fight happened in that room and the people who had been fighting left. Uncle Nico is in the last canoe and paddling alone, since Aunt Venus is sleeping in the bottom of the canoe, because that is what she does on family trips, sleep. We'll only be gone 10 days because Uncle Nico is on the traveling press corps for Barack Obama's campaign to be president of the United States and has to work 24/7, as he says. We are all very excited about Barack Obama and what his election will mean and what he believes in and what he will do for the country. And I am also excited, but mainly to be invited to the White House to have dinner with Sasha and Malia and Michelle, and even the president if he gets to be president. I'm sure we can arrange something, Thomas, Uncle Nico says. So having dinner with Barack Obama is a little like this trip. Maybe I will find out that Georgie's father did murder her mother, or maybe that he didn't. Either way, I will have a story to tell when I go back to school in the fall. My father told me not long before he died that I should take care of my eyes. He was sitting in a chair in the hospital in Chicago next to a window, overlooking the beautiful city, and by then he was a little fuzzy. His words spoken as if through the thickness of vanilla pudding. But Thomas, he said, take care of your eyes because you can see things that other people don't. Most people are very poor at looking. Your mother, for example, is a painter, but what she sees is in her imagination. What Georgie sees is in her past, and what you see is here. What I have discovered already by looking at people is that nothing is normal. Most people are stranger than they seem to be, and you never know what to expect of them, even of yourself. I should let you know, though you probably can already tell, that I'm not a regular 13-year-old kid, absorbed like water into the center of the group. For starters, ever since my father died, I've had a speech problem that Georgie says is nerves, and the doctor says is a speech problem. I begin a perfectly normal sentence, and 5 words out, or maybe 6 or 7, I can't speak. I see the sentence on the screen of my brain, rolling out word after word, just as I planned it, but nothing. Silence. So now I'm in acting classes, playing Malvolio and Twelfth Night in the Summer Children's Theater when I get back home. If you memorize someone else's words instead of making up your own, maybe you'll be able to speak sentence to sentence, is what my mother says. Which is why she is sending me to acting classes, which I love, which are the best part of my life. Nothing could be better than being with someone who I am not. When I was little, maybe 3 or 4, I fell in love with dinosaurs. I could spend day after day lying on my stomach in the living room of our apartment in Chicago, reading dinosaur books or playing with the dinosaurs my father had brought me at the National History Museum, or dreaming about them until I understood extinction. And then for weeks and months, I would lie in my bed, the covers drawn up to my eyes, alert to changes in the atmosphere around us, which might announce the arrival of extinction. I was heartbroken for the dinosaurs, apologizing to each one, the Diplodocus, the Triceratops, the Stegosaurus, as if I were in some way responsible. But that gave way to a terrifying fear for my family and for me. If those huge and powerful beasts, roaming the same earth on which we live, could disappear, what did that mean for me and my mother and my father and the rest of us? And I told my parents one night at bedtime that I thought it a good idea not to have any more children. If you never become alive, I explained to them, there is nothing of you to disappear. I was 10 when my father died of brain cancer on the morning of August 20th, 2006, just before school started. I knew he was going to die. Everyone had told me, my mother and Uncle Nico and Venus, who went briefly by the name of Antigone that summer, and even Georgie, who did not believe that children should be left without hope. Georgie explained that they told me the truth about my father, so I would be prepared for his death when it happened. But I was not. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Such wonderful writing from both of you so far, and we have yet to go with 2 more marvelous writers. Howard Norman is the author of 7 novels: The Northern Lights, The Bird Artist, The Museum Guard, The Haunting of Elle, Devotion, What Has Left the Daughter, and Next Life Might Be Kinder. 2 collections of short stories, Kiss in the Hotel, Joseph Conrad, and Other Stories, and The Chauffeur, and 3 nonfiction books, My Famous Evening, Nova Scotia Sojourns, Diaries and Preoccupations, In Fond Remembrance of Me, and I Hate to Leave This Beautiful Place, as well as several books for juvenile audiences and books of Canadian folklore. His forthcoming memoir is Please Be With Me in the Late Hour. The Bird Artist won the New England Booksellers Association Prize in Fiction, It and the Northern Lights were National Book Award finalists. He is also the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Lannan Literary Award for Fiction, and the Whiting Writers Award. He has taught at Goucher College and the University of Vermont, and he now teaches at the University of Maryland. And also, I'm very pleased to say he's a member of the honorary board of the Writers Center. So we're very glad to have Howard with us tonight.
I'm not going to read much of my own work. I wanted just to say a few words about Richard, and then read a very, very short little section. In 1974, when I moved to Ann Arbor to be in the Society of Fellows, which was a 3-year fellowship, I believe that Richard and Christina were already living in Huron Towers apartments. My opinion may well be at odds with Richard's, but I felt that the literary eminences in Ann Arbor in those years were the elderly scholar and professor Li Chi, who had moved from Vancouver and who was translating ancient Chinese travel journals and poetry, and the poet Robert Hayden. I was especially impressed with Bob Hayden. Amiri Baraka had recently carried out a very public and very stupid and infantile tirade against Robert Hayden. And there were other aspects of that attack, but I remember vividly how wounded Bob was. And I have many memories of Ann Arbor. W.S. Merwin visited there. But most importantly, and most indelibly, was my being able to be in the proximity, and I hope Richard feels the orbit of friendship of Richard Ford. But in my life, and I've always felt that the peace of my heart and the ultimate good luck are too seldom considered. But in my life, as they were the books Richard wrote when I first knew him, they exemplified Richard's writing life, along with his general literary erudition. For me, Richard was only the second writing life of a novelist I had even witnessed a little bit. The first being that of Peter Matheson, who I had met in of all places, Churchill, Manitoba. He was doing ornithology work, and I didn't even know he was a writer. Something we laughed about a week before Peter died at home in Sagaponack. But those two guys, Richard and Peter, obviously are and will remain in the top echelons of literary regard, to say the least. But what I really most want to say here this evening is that it is really something for a very unlettered person as I was at age 24, and nearly 15 years away from writing a novel myself, to be around Richard, who exhibited the utmost devotion and passion toward writing prose fiction. It was exciting and daunting, perhaps in equal measure. I worry that maybe Richard may feel embarrassed at my mentioning all of this, because at the time, he certainly never was anything but cordial and kind and supportive to me. Never anything but open about the sheer arduousness of the writing he was doing at the time. Never anything but a man of refined perspective and very tough self-assessment. Very tough self-assessment. It wasn't a matter of modesty or lack of modesty, nor was it a matter of positioning oneself in the literary world, nor was it ever a matter of knowing how just to talk about writing. It was a matter of getting down to work. And that is how I remember it, and I feel I remember it accurately. In this personal sense, I found a piece of my heart and the ultimate good luck formative, not only because they were Richard Ford's, and he was writing short stories at the time too, first books, but because they were models for what could be accomplished in a writing life of such conviction and such a sense of being in it for the long run, for one's whole life. Superlatives can only really be understatements, and it can only be redundant to speak to the astonishing books Richard has written. I am way past admiration for Canada, and let me be frank with you, to name just the recent volumes. I didn't start to write fiction until I met my wife, Jane Shore, but I had wanted to write it when I met Richard Ford, because he was what Chekhov in the letter called the inspiring phenomenon. And even then I knew the real thing when I saw it. A person for whom literature was a way of organizing a life and of being in the world fearlessly and beautifully. I felt at the beginning that Richard knew enough to allow literature to dignify his life. And look what has happened over the decades. Richard's writing has dignified literature. Lives get tossed about and time passes, and people don't get to see each other as often as they might like. It would be hubris and presumption to think more than a minute whether or not Richard ever reads or cares to read in an astonishing busy life any books of mine, and it really doesn't matter. What matters is only one thing, really, which is that Richard should read, if he reads a book of mine, he'd hopefully find some good qualities in it, but far more important than that he knows my memories of his writing life remain very immediate and vivid and inspiring. And that I'm full of wonder at what he himself has written, though I have to say, given what I saw and felt in the 1970s, it does not really surprise me. For the talent was already in motion, and all of that knowledge and passion and hard labor was already in motion. Recognition well earned, accomplishment well earned, books indispensable to our literary culture, all part of Richard Ford's writing life. But the little section of this book I'm going to read, which is called Next Life Might Be Kinder, really is more about what I felt about Richard and Christine at the time. This is a novel about two people who fall in love and are very besotted and smitten with each other, and very deeply in love. And I'm going to read just a short section from this book. They're living in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in a hotel, and he's trying to write a novel. His name's Sam, and her name is Elizabeth, and she's trying to get him to earn some money. And this little section is called Kiss Me Upward from My Knees. Sam, you need some employment, Elizabeth said. This was a few days after her first lesson in the intermediate Lindy at the hotel. We were down to $320 in our bank account. I'm working on my novel every day, I said. I know, she said. If I know anything, I know that. Can't we take turns being the practical one? I'll go first. I saw this advertisement, and I think it would be great for you. The CBC has an interesting thing going, and they're looking for writers. You could write for radio. Listen, I've got the clipping right here. CBC Radio is undertaking an ambitious recreation of the cultural atmosphere of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, featuring the most popular radio entertainments of those decades. This is very autobiographical. I did this. And the names of the programs are real radio programs from that era. So. Okay, I said, I admit it does sound interesting. You can't do business with Hitler. That's one program they're hiring writers for. The Shadow of Fu Manchu, that's another. But there's one I thought you'd be perfect for, Sam. And I even remember hearing it on the radio when I was a little girl. It's called Mr. Keene, Tracer of Lost Persons. Melodramas about a detective named, let me guess, Mr. Keene. I typed up and sent your resume last week, including a copy of your first novel. You already went and did that? I did. And did I get a response yet? In fact, they called this morning when you were out. You have an interview. Darling, my fellowship money is dwindling fast. I can waitress, I don't mind. I'm applying for the radio work myself, but my brain doesn't work that way. I couldn't make up the dialogue and all of that. The interview? 4 p.m. tomorrow at the CBC office on Cogswell Street. The interview went well, and the CBC gave me 4 cassettes of episodes of Mr. Keene, Tracer of Lost Persons, part 1 through 4 of the case of the author who lost his soul, which originally ran on the NBC Blue Network. For my audition, I was asked to write a 5th episode to extend the storyline, even though in the original broadcast the story had been fully concluded. I went right back to the hotel and listened to the cassettes. Part 1. Jane Merrill asks Keene to locate her ex, Stephen Giddings, a struggling author. An unpublished novel he wrote years ago is now in demand. Giddings left Jane to wed affluent Rita Sanford. Synopsis. Rita could support Giddings' writing lifestyle. Jane still loves him and wants to see the book succeed. Detective Keene finds the Giddings living in Bermuda and flies down to urge Stephen to return to writing. Part 3. Giddings has changed. He and Rita live wasted, lazy existences. He hasn't written in years. Disillusioned, he's fed up with his marriage. Keene reports this to Jane. Part 4. Mr. Keene takes Giddings, a beaten failure, back to his first wife, Jane. Giddings realizes that all his achievements spring from the devotion and encouragement of this woman. I played the episodes for Elizabeth that night. "Oh, this will be a piece of cake for you," she said. "I'm not sure I like that response," I said, seeing that the title is "The Author Who Lost His Soul." "It's fiction, darling. Just pretend to be somebody else." I wrote the episode and I got the job. To celebrate my becoming employed, Elizabeth made salad niçoise with creme brulee for dessert. At the kitchen table, I was typing away at my first paid assignment to extend the episodes of The Case of Lucy Dare's Real Family, originally broadcast in 1939. Elizabeth was wearing only a denim work shirt, a few sizes too big for her, held together by a single button at the navel. "Making your favorite aphrodisiac salad for you, Sam. I bought an expensive bottle of Chablis too, way too expensive, and I couldn't be happier." She took a small fillet of tuna from the refrigerator and seared it for a few minutes in a pan slicked with olive oil. She put 2 eggs on to boil. She took out a head of lettuce and washed it leaf by leaf under the spigot, pressing each on a paper towel to soak up the moisture before setting it in a big wooden bowl. She put 2 large red potatoes, cut in quarters, in a pot of water and lit a flame under it. She put a handful of green beans on to boil. She took out a breadboard and cut 3 scallions into 1/4-inch pieces and pushed them with a knife into a saucepan where she sautéed them for a minute or 2 in olive oil. On a separate board, she cut the tuna into 1/4-inch pieces. She took out the potatoes, peeled the skins, and cut the pieces into neat rectangles. She took up the eggs with a spoon and ran each under cold water. Then she cracked and peeled their shells and sliced the eggs into the salad. She put in the potatoes and fish and scallions. She sprinkled in peppercorns, laid the green beans on top, and dropped in 6 or so sweet grape tomatoes. She emptied a can of white kidney beans in the bowl. She added an oil and vinegar dressing, tossing it all lightly, just twice, with long wooden spoons, and set the bowl on the table. She brought out 2 plates and forks and cloth napkins. She took a bottle of white wine from the refrigerator and poured us each a glass. I was famished, and the salad looked so good. "Thank you for all this," I said, and reached for the bowl and wooden spoons that lay crosswise on top. But before she sat down, Elizabeth put on an album by Marianne McConaughey called Winter Trees on the phonograph and set the needle on the song called Upward. Fiddle, guitar, and flute accompaniment with a voice straight from the Cape Breton Highlands. The first stanza was, "It only takes 1 glass of wine to do as I please. The breeze gently unbuttons my blouse. I comb your hair with my fingers. You kiss me upward from my knees." As the song continued, Elizabeth opened the button of her denim shirt. "Last night I was reading an Acadian romance, all pounding hearts and rain, and owls at prayer in the trees. When my sweet love, you set my book behind the pillow and kissed me upward from my knees." "Get the hint," Elizabeth said. She lay down on the Victorian chaise-longue. Elizabeth used to say, "I have certain defining impulses." Thank you.
ask the man of the hour, as Jeffrey described it, if you wouldn't mind stand up so that everyone can acknowledge the inspiration of people who so many years ago.
You can all see why I wanted them to read tonight. Collegiality means everything to me. To have my friends who are wonderful writers, to have wonderful writers who are my friends. We all of us, and this is kind of for me the theme of this weekend, we all of us stand on each other's shoulders all the time. That's what it means to have friends who are writers, or writers who are friends. We don't compete. We're only happy when each of us does something well, and that's for me the reason that I have these wonderful people in my life. So thank you so much.
So with those very gracious words from Richard Ford, please join us for a reception, book signing. There are books available for purchase at our reception desk. And again, we don't have salad d'Isoise, but we do have some other lovely refreshments. So thanks so much for coming. This has been a memorable evening for me, and I hope for all of you.